Okay, brilliant. We've got over 80 people on the webinar so far. So break a start. Thank you for joining us all today for this INSITE webinar. It's the first in our Phase 3 webinar series. Over the past decade, the INSITE programme's been addressing fundamental scientific questions to improve the understanding of the influence and value of structures in the marine environment. My name's Georgina Roberts and I'm the INSITE Science Programme Coordinator, and I'll be introducing today's webinar and guiding you through this session. Many of you will already be familiar with the INSITE programme, but it's probably worth noting that when the programme was established in 2014, it was the first joint industry partnership of its kind in UK marine research. From the outset, INSITE's aim has been to provide independent scientific evidence to help stakeholders better understand how marine artificial structures influence North Sea ecosystems and the stakeholders surrounding. Over the past 10 plus years, INSITE has attracted leading research teams to tackle major scientific challenges, delivering over 16 projects, 1 large-scale data sharing initiative, 6 PhD projects and 1 major synthesis project involving 36 international experts on the effects and outcomes of decommissioning, all of which you can see at the bottom of the screen. And now we're entering into the next chapter with 3 new research projects underway as the part of INSITE Phase 3, which we'll be introducing in more detail today. But first, I'd like to give you a little bit of information about how we got here and the INSITE Phase 3 programme. So since the programme began, INSITE has grown significantly, bringing together an increasing range of partners and funders. And Phase 3 marks the first ever joint partnership between industry and the Natural Environment Research Council, which together fund the programme and to whom we're ever grateful for the continued support, helping to fill evidence gaps and continuing to inform policy and regulation in this space. With the addition of the Science Advisory Group, our role includes ensuring the scientific independence of INSITE and supporting projects by providing expert guidance, monitoring progress and shaping research to remain robust, policy relevant and impactful. INSITE Scientific Advisory Group is composed of the members shown here, each bringing relevant expertise in marine and environmental science and governance experience to support the programme. So how did we get here? Well, INSITE Phase 3 was born out of multiple rounds of workshops with the Industry Executive Committee, where we collectively developed a set of project ideas which were then shared widely with stakeholders, including government advisors and scientists, statutory nature conservation bodies, environmental non-government organisations, consultancies and academic institutions. This collaborative process helped identify INSITE's top priorities for Phase 3 and shaped the 3 projects and themes which you can see on the screen. We have README, which is led by Sean Rees from the University of Plymouth and is looking into research to explore attitudes and perceptions to decommissioning in the marine environment. We have Corrode, which is led by Alfred Akinzanya at the University of Aberdeen, which is looking at coating and residue release from offshore degraded equipment. And we have VALMAS, the values of marine artificial structures, which is being led by Nicola Beaumont at the National Oceanography Centre. As always, we will continue to build and maintain strong relationships across sectors and facilitate collaboration between industry and scientific teams, which will be essential to the success of the research going forward. And while each project has its own specific focus and vision, they are closely aligned around a shared vision, delivering trusted science that helps industry, regulators and wider society manage offshore structures in ways that support environmental health, sustainable operations and a successful energy transition. VALMAS aims to strengthen insights on the social, economic and ecological value of marine artificial structures. README is generating evidence to inform stakeholder engagement, policy and decision making, and Corrode will deliver predictive tools for understanding corrosion, sediments and environmental impacts. By working in an integrated way, the projects aim to produce coordinated outcomes connecting natural science, engineering and social science, and ensuring Phase 3 delivers practical insights to inform any new regulations and changes to policy. So to start us off and to introduce the first project of Phase 3, we're delighted to welcome Professor Nicola Beaumont from the National Oceanography Centre, who will be sharing an overview of the value of Marine Artificial Structures project. We'll then hear from other INSITE project investigators, including Professor Sian Rees from the University of Plymouth and Daryl Burden from Daryl Burden Limited, and Professor Richard Nielsen from the University of Aberdeen and the National Decommissioning Centre. I'll then host a question and answer session towards the end of the webinar, giving you the opportunity to ask our speakers any questions about today's talks. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar, but you can submit your questions or comments at any time via the Q&A tab in Teams at the top of your screen. You can also upvote questions to highlight those you're most interested in. And one final note before we hear from our first speaker is that in addition to this webinar being recorded, an illustration will be created alongside these talks and Q&A, and the final image will be made available via the INSITE website. We hope you enjoy the webinar, and with that, I'll hand over to Nicola to get us started. Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks, Georgina. That's brilliant. I'll just share my screen. So hopefully everybody can see that now, and give me a shout if you can't, because I no longer can see everybody else. So hello and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nikki Beaumont. As Georgina said, I'm based at the National Oceanographic Centre, and I'm very fortunate in leading the VALMAS project. So VALMAS stands for the Value of Marine Artificial Structures, and this piece of work is funded by UCRI and INSITE collectively. The aim of giving the funding to this area was to enhance our understanding of the ecological, economic and social value of marine artificial structures and their natural capital in order to inform better decision making and policy solutions. The website is here. You're welcome to go and have a look. It's still in development, but do have a little look. And my co-lead is Dr. Steve Watson. The project team is made up of 9 academic institutes, 3 consultancies and Natural England. And we also have on board Marine Energy Wales and 3 of the main UK fishing organisations. The vision of VALMAS is to ensure a just, nature positive and economically efficient energy transition, which enhances biodiversity and safeguards ecosystem services. This includes fisheries and carbon sequestration. And our mission, and I think this is a really important piece, this is predominantly to empower decision makers. We are not a group of academics who are hoping to shuffle away in our laboratories for the next 4 years. We really want to make sure that everything we do is useful and applicable to the outside world. The focus of VALMAS is on the North Sea, but we do aspire to be transferable. So we're hoping that our findings will be able to be applied to other areas as well. As I've mentioned already, our focus is on the ecosystem service of carbon, fisheries and biodiversity. But again, we will branch out more broadly than this where we can. And we're looking at all marine artificial structures, but our focus here is on pre-active and post-decommissioning, compensatory measures and offshore wind. This figure gives an overview of our work packages. This is a 4-year project, so we've got a good amount of time laying ahead of us. We're about 6 months in so far. The first work package is an overarching one, and the idea of this is to understand and synthesize what's currently happening in this landscape. And I'll talk a bit more about this groundwork. And this work package one is what we're really focusing on in this first year to make sure that what we do after this is really well grounded in the current evidence. Work package 2 is very interdisciplinary also. And this is around developing a natural capital framework for the whole project. This is really important because it makes sure we're all speaking the same language and we're all using the same natural capital terminology throughout the team. Then we've got 3 more disciplinary work packages, which are more focused. We've got work package 3, which is looking at modelling, work package 4, which is our field and natural science work package, and work package 5, which is our social science work package. I say these are separate, but as you can see by the arrows, they're actually very interlinked and each are codependent on each other. All of these work packages then feed into work package 6, which is around devising decision support tools. And in a moment, I'll go into a little bit more depth about how each of these work packages is developing. So the team are very well connected. This slide gives you an overview of some of the partners that we have already. It's actually expanded quite a long way beyond this now, with many more partners also included. These are our critical friends and who are closely involved with our work. We're also very well embedded in a whole range of projects that are happening and have happened in the past and are forecast to happen in the future. The strong aim of the VALMAS is to make sure that we make use of what's happened before and what's ongoing, rather than repeating and reinventing the wheel. So if we're going into a little bit more detail about those work packages now, starting with the work package 1, this is where a lot of our energy has been so far. And the first task within work package 1 is to map the current landscape. One of the reasons I was so excited to apply for the VALMAS funding and then be awarded it is I've worked on offshore energy for the last 20 years. And the landscape out there is incredibly muddled. There's a huge amount going on, lots of people doing amazing work, but there's a lack of connectivity between that. So we're not always getting the wins that we'd hope for, particularly at an industry and government decision-making level. So VALMAS aims to bring this all together so we can have a bit more bang for our buck and make a little bit more difference with our evidence. So the first piece of work within Work Package 1 is to map this landscape, and we aim to map what's happening in terms of the research and evidence. We aim to map the stakeholders, and we aim to map the governance. So just to go into each of these 3 activities in a little bit more detail, we've begun to map the current evidence. We know that there is work being done on this before, and we're building on this. We're focusing on those ecosystem services that I mentioned earlier. And Steve Watson and Andy Edwards-Jones have been leading this work from the Plymouth Marine Laboratory. We held a workshop back in November with more than 50 people present, some online and some in the room, and asked the 2 questions really. What evidence do we need to make better decisions? And what actually have we got? What's published or is currently existing? This is in terms of current projects as well as things that have already been published and are out in the public domain. So we had a workshop, lots of post-it notes, lots of doodle boards, and we're bringing this evidence together at the moment to try and understand where we sit and where we really need to be focused. What are the key evidence gaps that we need to fill in the future? This figure shows a bar chart produced out of the ORIS decision-making tool, which has been developed at the Plymouth Marine Laboratory. And you can see very clearly here that of the 3 ecosystem services we're looking at, carbon sequestration has the least amount of evidence associated with it. It's quite remarkable how little understanding there is about the influence of artificial structures on carbon sequestration. So a clear evidence gap here. Interestingly, in terms of the outcome direction, so are these impacts positive or negative? This is very varied as well. We can see lots of these impacts are negative, but many have no impact or we don't really know, and many have positive impacts. So real variability here. So what we're doing at the moment is we're using those workshop outputs. We're using the synthesis that have happened already, such as this one here in ORIS, and we're doing an additional scoping of the literature. We then, once we've got all the evidence together, will undertake a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats analysis, a SWOT analysis, and produce a report. And the idea of this report that should be published in the next few months is it will provide a grounding for where we're going in VALMAS in terms of where we want to direct our research and our energies for the next 3 years. But also it should help outside of VALMAS to understand where the critical evidence and evidence gaps are. So the second mapping exercise is the stakeholders. And again, we are aware that there have been stakeholder maps before, but often these are focused on specific sectors. And VALMAS is an opportunity where we can do an integrated map. So to really understand all the different players that are involved in this area, look for those overlaps and conflicts, and look for opportunities where we can better share knowledge and share capacities. So again, we had a workshop in November, bringing everyone together, lots of people, diverse actors from government departments, academia, industry groups, NGOs, plus a whole host of others as well. And it's really important, we feel, to bring everybody together into this stakeholder mapping exercise. Some of the key research questions that we'd like to ask around this are who is missing from our current network, so who are we missing? And there's be lots of opportunities for everyone on this call to get involved in this, as I'll highlight shortly. So any feedback you have would be great. We want to understand this network better. So we're going to be doing some analysis of the network to understand, for example, what are the connections between these stakeholders? Where are people working together effectively? And more importantly, possibly, where are they not working together well? We want to understand how communication and engagement is used and how this can be improved going forward. We want to ensure better data sharing, collaboration and coordination between all these different stakeholders. And also at our workshop, we asked for any key concerns that our stakeholders have. So really building up this picture of who's doing what where in this marine artificial structures world. So some of the next steps will be aligning with the README project, which you'll be hearing more about shortly, and reviewing this database and having a little bit of an overview of what gaps are present, and then prioritizing which are the most important research questions to focus on. And Emma McKinley is leading this work. Her email is here, and I can share the contact details if you want to get involved. The third mapping exercise is on governance, and this has been led by Anne-Michelle Slater in Aberdeen. And she's been looking at relevant laws, policies, guidance and practices and regulatory bodies. This is so important because we want to do research that is relevant to industry and relevant to government. And if we don't understand the governance landscape in which this sits, we can come up with great ideas, but they'll never move ahead because they don't fit within the governance and law landscape. So again, we had an interactive workshop where we hope to gather some insights to shape and visualize this framework. And we wanted to refine our understanding as well. So some of the outputs are from the governance mapping. Our ongoing governance mapping has been augmented and refined from the activities that we had. We have begun to sense check some of our data collection with our industry input at the workshop. We're now developing a visual governance landscape, which we'll be able to share. And we're also thinking about what are the most important research questions when it comes to this governance landscape. So some ideas of research questions shown here. For example, is the existing legal regime, is it actually appropriate to operationalise the rapidly changing policy priorities which are currently underway? So a host of other questions. I'm not going to read all through them here, but this is to kind of we're going to try and dig into the governance landscape and ask some really interesting questions going forward. So that's our mapping exercise. The second thing in work package 1 is engagement coordination. This is a very outward facing project. If you haven't heard about it already, I'm sure you will be hearing a lot more about it. There's lots of workshops, lots of activities and lots of opportunities to get engaged. The third piece of work package 1 is the co-development of management scenarios. What we want to do throughout this project is focus on a series of management scenarios which will be intended to be valid and useful to industry and government and user groups more generally. So when we use the word scenario, it means really different. It's a funny word, scenario. I think everyone's come across this, like it means very different things to different people. So like for the modelers in the project, it's a really specific set of criteria which they're going to test. Whereas for some of our social scientists, it's a much higher level storyline. And what we want to do in Valmas, because we're an incredibly interdisciplinary team, is to use both these approaches. We also want to make sure that we're linking in with the other scenarios used in the other programs in INSITE, such as README. So what we're proposing to do, following discussions with lots of our stakeholders, and again, welcome input, is to have a nested system of scenarios. So you've got future storylines, which are shown here in this green table at the bottom, and they'll be linked in with more specific sets of criteria. And I'll show you those in just a moment. But this thinking is under development and we should be finalising this towards May. So these are some of the more specific parameters and conditions which we'd like to include in the scenarios. And again, at this meeting today, if you've got comments or thoughts on scenarios we should be looking at, please do put them in the chat. We want to be understanding what the future rounds look like. We want to look at nature inclusive design, possibly the impact of different spatial configuration. We're really interested in compensatory measures. I think the different compensation approaches for fisheries are absolutely critical to this project. What's the impact of using different structure materials. We will, for all of them, look at different climate change scenarios, and we want to look at the potential contribution of co-located activities. So these some of that give you a feeling of some of the things we want to explore. Then the fourth thing in this first work package is we are going to, and are in the process of, devising a community of practice for marine artificial structures. And what this is it's a place to bring everybody together, all those stakeholders I mentioned earlier, because what we know and what we keep hearing is that everything's interlinked. There's an awful lot happening, lots of discussions happening, but no one's really linking everybody up. So that's what we want to do in ValMaz. We want to join people together. We want to better connect people, co-develop our knowledge, and support some improved evidence-driven management and solutions. The community practice, this is what we've been working on the last 6 months. It's very transdisciplinary, including pretty much everybody. We want to align with key value dimensions. It's a space, a safe space where we can share perspectives and trade-offs and build up trust and legacy. We're, again, wanting to support this real-world decision-making, and it's a space for knowledge exchange. And the idea is that we keep our stakeholders updated on what's happening in ValMaz and in the INSITE 3 programme across the board, and really driving towards this idea of co-designing everything we do. And particularly at the moment, we want to be driving towards this co-design of those scenarios I just mentioned. So with HMC, we're aiming at the moment to develop different communication materials. We've got lots of thoughts on how to do this, but if you've got ideas around this, please do pop them in the chat. Also, Emma, again, is leading this, so any thoughts you can email her directly. So that's everything in Work Package 1, and I'm focusing a lot on that today because that's what we've actually been doing for the last 6 months. But at the same time, we've been developing our other work packages. So Work Package 2 is our natural capital values framework, and this has been moving along well. And this is the idea that we all in the project, and more widely now, provide a natural capital framework that can be applied across the board. Our Work Package 3 is our modelling work package, and this is a really exciting part of the project. It's a suite of models that we're bringing together. We've got in the middle here FECOM, and PyLag and MISA. And these models are very much looking at the physics, the biogeochemistry, trophic dynamics, and ecosystem functioning. But then these provide input to our EcoPath, EcoSim, EcoSpace, and EcoTracer suite of models. And what these suite of models will do is they'll help us to understand the contaminant leaching and propagation of contaminants through the food web. The contaminants we're thinking of focusing on are mercury, but again, that's under discussion at the moment. The scenarios have begun, but the real emphasis of these will be in year 2 and 3 and 4. In addition to that piece on the right-hand side, the EcoPath to EcoSim modelling. On the left-hand side, we've also got this high-level, system-level response modelling, which is led out of Strathclyde. And what this piece does is it gives us this much wider, much broader scale modelling approach. This is the Strath E2E model. So this model ensemble should be able to bring together all the data. We'll run those scenarios that I've mentioned earlier, and it will feed into the decision support tools, hopefully answering some of the big questions that we have. Work Package 4 is our new analysis, observations and field data. Now, this is an interesting one because we actually haven't decided the details of what we're going to do here, which can make people a bit nervous, but we've got a set of technologies and approaches which we'll be applying. The reason that we're doing it this way is we wanted to do that gap analysis and the synthesis that I mentioned earlier, so we could really understand where's the best place to put our resources? Where's the best place? Where are the real areas we need to be focusing on? So we'll be doing some AI pattern recognition to understand changes in biodiversity and carbon. We'll be doing some seabed carbon field work to better understand biodiversity and seabed carbon field work. We'll be looking in depth at those contaminant fluxes and doing some acoustic monitoring as well. And we'll also be doing some simulator data mining. But the details, like I say, of these will be finalised once we've got that gap analysis undertaken from Work Package 1. Then Work Package 5 is our social science work package. And this is the first part of this is understanding what is the North Sea for anyway, which is, I think, an incredibly valid question. And the idea here is we're taking a 3 horizons approach. We're beginning by understanding what the current management positives and problems are. Then we'll be asking our various user groups, what is your vision for the future? And then understanding how to bridge these 2 different horizons. We've then got some economic valuation of changes in carbon, fish and biodiversity under the different scenarios. And then we've got, finally in work package 5, the socio-cultural and shared values of mass. And here what we'll be doing is a range of questionnaires and ethnographic interviews, and also having a national citizen panel. And the idea of this is to really understand who the winners and losers are. And because if we don't suggest future pathways that are acceptable to people, then there's no way they'll take off. Our final work package is around developing decision support tools, and this is led by Steve Watson at the Plymouth Marine Laboratory. And here what we'll be doing is understanding what decision support tools have been used in the past and which ones will be useful for the future. So we're talking at the moment to user groups to understand what they'd like, developing the ones we've got already, because we're lucky within the project that we already have a suite of decision support tools. We may be exploring the potential for digital twin. Critically, we'll have a federated data architecture, so everything we devise in the project will be accessible through this data architecture. And finally, towards the end of the project, in years 3 and 4, we'll be testing the different decision support tools to make sure they're actually doing the job that they need. There's lots of time and scope within the project to alter the decision support tools if we need to, because we want to make sure that they're useful. So that was everything. Very quick whiz through of Valmaz. Hopefully that was useful to everybody, and very happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much for that overview, Nikki. There's a lot happening, and it's great to hear how much has already been done since the start of the project, with lots of ideas still in motion. I think it's a good moment to remind everyone watching to please submit any questions or thoughts or visions for the North Sea in the Q&A tab at the top of the screen. You can upvote the questions from other attendees, and we'll be coming back to that at the Q&A at the end of the session. Thanks, Nikki. So if we're moving on to we're now moving on to Sian and Daryl Burden for README, and they'll be sharing some insights of the project. Over to you both. Thank you.
Hi there, good afternoon, everyone. I will just share my screen. Does that work for you all? I'm hoping it does, because as Nikki said, I can't see you now. So the README project. So we are research to explore attitudes and perceptions to decommissioning in the marine environment. We are a rapid delivery project, so we will be wrapping up all of this work by September 2027. So we are delivering a lot of the work that we're going to explain at pace. But this is the team that I'm fortunate enough to work with, and we have members of staff from the University of Aberdeen, the National Decommissioning Centre, Daryl Burden from Daryl Burden Limited, who will be sharing his presentation with me, and also Joe Ferris from ECAP Consultancy. The overarching vision for the README project is to deliver comprehensive, transparent and impactful research that investigates public and stakeholder attitudes and perceptions towards the decommissioning of oil and gas platforms, offshore wind farms and their associated infrastructure, and also the management of shipwrecks, including how those perceptions and attitudes might change according to different evidence-based narrative scenarios for marine artificial structure decommissioning. We have 4 research questions. The first research question is around what evidence exists around decommissioning. So what is the globally relevant economic, social and environmental evidence relating to decommissioning of these marine artificial structures? The second part of our research is around who sits at the table. So when we're considering equity in marine management, which stakeholder groups, including the public as well, should be targeted when we're considering the effects of decommissioning. So we're really interested in when we do the public perceptions and the stakeholder perceptions, is that we are ensuring that we are reaching as many people as possible and as many groups as possible. Some of those who may not even feel that they have any sort of stake or seat at the table in terms of decommissioning options, but it's really important that we ask those questions. The third research question is, what are stakeholders, including members of the public, what is their baseline perception of decommissioning? What do they think about marine artificial structures in the water without having, based on their current knowledge base, recognizing that different people may have different levels of knowledge, but I think generally, when I go and ask my family what do they know about decommissioning, you know, there's not really there's not really much there at all. It's not very high on people's radar in terms of what they're thinking about on a day-to-day basis. So we are quite a select group when we're thinking about decommissioning in this kind of way. And then research question 4, which is how do those baseline perceptions change when presented with different evidence-based narrative scenarios for decommissioning? So this very much builds on research question 1, what is the current evidence, and how do people's perceptions then change when presented with this evidence in different ways, and does it change at all? So our objectives and deliverables are very much linked to those research questions. The first piece is that evidence-based information package. The second piece, which is that research question around equity and who sits at the table, will develop a stakeholder and public engagement plan. And then deliverable 3 and 4, which Darryl will talk about a bit more in a minute, is around the online questionnaire that we'll deliver, and then also the focus groups to assess attitudes and perceptions. And then our final delivery is the main project report, the policy brief. We've got numerous stakeholder briefings, and we intend to develop at least one peer-reviewed paper out of this research programme. So I'll hand over to Darryl, and Darryl, you just have to verbally say when you want me to progress the slide, because I can't see you.
No worries. Thanks, Sian. Yeah, so just quickly to introduce some of the work that I'll be working on over the next sort of 18 months or so. I should say this work's been led by Paula Duffy at the University of Aberdeen, and I'm presenting on her behalf today. So as Sian says, there's two main elements to our survey work. There's a public survey and then a stakeholder survey. So the first sort of the public survey side of things, we're currently developing a question bank, trying to come up with a list of questions building on previous work, such as the Ocean Literacy Survey, to try and assess the public's attitude and perceptions towards decommissioning, both before and after they've been provided with some evidence. So we see the questionnaire structure being very much set into 4 different sections. The first section being very much about the participants' characteristics, how they value particular areas such as heritage, environment, sustainability, including things like the circular economy and ownership. The second section then tries to generate some baseline perceptions of decommissioning, talking in very high level, talking about things like steel, concrete on the seabed in various different forms. Obviously, this project's taking that wide view of not only oil and gas, but also offshore wind and shipwrecks as well, and how they're managed. The third section would then provide them with some exposure to the evidence. This is based very much on research question 1, this kind of evidence base. And then following that, we then ask them about their perceptions and preferences of 10 evidence-based scenarios, with these scenarios based around oil and gas, offshore wind, and also shipwrecks, and then seeing how their perceptions and their attitudes change following sort of exposure to this evidence. The questionnaire will be administered by a market research company, and we're aiming for a sample of 1,000 UK responses across the board. Next slide, please, Sean. Thank you. The second part of the work is where we start to engage with stakeholders. And as the second research objective that Sian mentioned, we'll be doing stakeholder mapping to identify who those people are who should be sat around the table. And then we'll contact them for 3 different elements to this project. The first will be an online baseline survey, which will capture their kind of initial perspectives with respect to decommissioning. Obviously, it'll take into account their experience, what sector they work in, and so forth. And we're looking to probably have a sample size of around 60 stakeholders. The second stage of the work will be kind of the information exposure. Well, I'll be provided with an evidence pack, which has been developed through Objective 1, which contains detailed evidence, but also things like 3D visualizations. And there's some examples there from Megan Squire, one of the researchers on the project, who's doing some 3D visualization work as part of her PhD at Aberdeen, to try and inform them about different decommissioning scenarios. And then the final stage is an in-person focus group, which we're going to host at the National Decommissioning Centre in Aberdeen, where stakeholders get to reassess their positions following information exposure before trying to build consensus on preferred evidence-based decommissioning approaches. And this is very much following the kind of Delphi approach to focus groups. Next slide, please, Sean. So that's what we're going to do. Basically, this is the time frame we're working towards. Obviously, Objective 1 and 2 are running and feeding at various elements. The whole project really is interlinked together. So Paula and I and Tavis and others are all currently reviewing existing survey questions, and we'll start to draft those questions over the next couple of months before running the questions by our project steering group in April. We then plan to pilot the public survey at the SIME conference, which is going to be in Newcastle in June, and I think we'll hear more about that later. We'll then refine the questions, undertake a full pilot survey with the market research company with the aim to administer that public survey sort of late August, September time this year. We would then take the objectives or the outputs from Objective 2, the kind of stakeholder list, we'll administer the stakeholder survey, followed by the interactive Delphi workshop, which again will take place later on in November. But again, we work with scenarios, which is very much being developed based on the evidence that's been delivered through Objective 1. And then, as Sian says, the final part of our project will be the analysis and reporting. So between January and April 2027, we'll be kind of reporting, and the kind of research end of our project will be finished by April 2027. And then we have time afterwards to kind of develop some impact and some of the dissemination elements of the project. Back over to you, Sian.
Thank you. Yes, so I think with every research programme, we should always ask what's new, what's different about what we're doing. The key points is that we are developing research protocols within the README programme that is ideally transferable. So whilst this is the baseline that's looking at evidence-based change around perceptions and attitudes, we're also developing this so it can be repeated in 3 years, 5 years, or it could be done in other parts of the North Sea, for example. So it's something that could be transferred elsewhere, and those protocols, research protocols, are repeatable and can be used. The stakeholder analysis that we're doing advances this idea of not only who's there and how they're connected, but actually what are the power and equity dynamics in decision making, and are there people that hold a lot of power and have a lot of risk within that system, so they hold that power, or are there people that actually maybe should have a bit more of an interest, but currently it's not on their radar at all? So it's that part of stakeholder analysis that we're bringing forward based on previous work that we've completed with the Marine Management Organisation. In terms of the evidence base, this will be the very first primary baseline data and attitudes, perceptions towards decommissioning across not only stakeholders who are already very much engaged, but also members of the public as well. So what does your grandma think? What does your cousin think of decommissioning in the marine environment? what's the general public on it. So it'll be the very first baseline evidence of that, which is going to be quite important for how the societal edge of policy develops. In terms of attitude change analysis, we are largely a group of experienced social scientists within this programme. I am actually completely new to the decommissioning scene in oil and gas. I've worked very much in fisheries and recreation and marine, so this side is very, very new to me, but it's not new to the rest of the team. But in terms of our social science expertise, we're bringing forward this use of how we do surveys, multi-stage consensus building, using Delphi methods to start to bring together consensus around different evidence-based scenarios amongst our stakeholders. We're really excited in this programme to bring forward Megan Squires' PhD, which is around actual visualisations of what is below the water and attached to these structures. Darryl showed a little snapshot of some pictures that Megan's already done, but these are actually 3D models that she's developing as part of her PhD. And so not only will we be able to present evidence on how these marine artificial structures influence ecology, economy and society, but then there's also this opportunity to also view it as well, and we'll be looking at how that changes people's attitudes. And then all of this wraps into this kind of innovation around methods development. So we're enhancing traditional social science research approaches. Megan and the NDC team are working on immersive 3D marine growth models. And then we're also supporting this real-time exploration of ecological and socioeconomic trade-offs. So bringing in this much more technical end into social research. What we hope that our research will influence is first of all that our own peers within the research sector is that we're developing something that's rigorous, it's transferable, and it also informs wider marine and natural capital based decision making. In practice, as I mentioned, a group sort of largely made up, we're not all social scientists, but largely made up of social scientists that are actually bringing forward new practice within that social science sector. In terms of society, as I mentioned, this will be the first time that societal concerns will be raised around marine artificial structures. So this supports this idea of inclusive dialogue that we often have in the marine planning process, and it also provides this platform to start to strengthen policy and governance through public buy-in, because this is the only way that we develop towards our much broader goals around net zero, healthy fisheries, productive seas, is if we're bringing as many people along as we can on that journey. In terms of economy, we hope that this actually influences those decommissioning options for marine artificial structures that generate those benefits across other economic sectors, under a vision for equitable marine management. Our marine environment supports all of us in many different ways, and so there will be potential for this research to influence those economic decisions. Are we benefiting the masses, or are we benefiting the few through those decisions that we make according to decommissioning? And then environment, because we're asking the public, it hopefully will clarify how decommissioning choices that we're currently making within perhaps our silos actually align with those broader societal environmental priorities or concerns that exist, and can we use this information to optimize environmental outcomes that actually have a broader remit for societal gain. So that's us. We're very early on in our process. We only started in September, October of last year. We're just getting going with the programme, and we're really open to any feedback or any broader discussion on how the research programme is developing. So thanks very much for your attention, and I will leave it there and stop sharing my screen.
Thanks both. It's really, really interesting project, and I guess watch this space. README's branching into a new area of research for the INSITE programme, and there's already a lot to take away from your presentation, so thank you both. The 3D visualisation work sounds really exciting, and we can't wait to unpick this research a little bit more. So just another reminder to all attendees to keep submitting any questions and thoughts into the Q&A tab. We'll be addressing those in a few minutes. But for now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Professor Richard Nielsen from the University of Aberdeen, and he'll be talking about the Corrode project. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks. Let's check that's shared okay?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Richard Nielsen, Centre Director of National Decommissioning Centre. I'm presenting on behalf of Alfred Akasanya, who's actually the lead for this project. Just one thing I want to highlight, actually. I mean, our title was Coating and Residue Release from Offshore Degraded Equipment, Corrode. When we originally pitched the project, we were including plastic coatings for the system, for the project as well. We had some partners in that. So just be aware that as I go through this, we will not be looking primarily at coatings, probably looking more at corrosion. So imagine reading corrosion and residue release from offshore degraded equipment is probably a slightly tighter title for this. So as with the README programme, we are relatively recently started. We're also a short-term fast delivery project. But the key thing is it's all to look at pipeline decommissioning, and some of the work we're going to do will feed quite directly into the Valmas project as well. There are bits of work which I'll try and highlight as we go along, which are likely to feed into work package 3, I think, in Valmas. So what we were asked to do, or pitched to do, was to look at the medium-term and long-term degradation of dispersal particles from left-in-place decommissioned rigid subsea pipelines, as well as the mobilization and environmental fate of contaminants from within the pipeline. So at the moment, there are options around leaving pipelines in place or removing them. And if we leave them in place, what's going to come out of that? Are we going to have particles which are left in the sea? So the objective is to dig into that in a little more detail. So one of the key things we need to look at then is degradation rate and characterization of the corrosion products of decommissioned left-in-place subsea pipelines. And this follows on from some work we've done with a PhD, Michael Olatunde, who's still working on this project as well. We're then going to look at the kind of release of key contaminants from in the pipeline. I'll discuss a bit more about scale and waxes and things like that in simulated marine conditions, and I'll look at developing contaminant leach models, which again, hopefully will link into some of the Valmas project. We then need to look at the kind of migraceous scale particles and associated contaminants through the marine sediments. And again, this links to Valmas a little bit as well. And the effect on sediment diffusivity and sequestration potential. And then we also need to look at particle transport under waves and currents. So if we're generating particles, whether these are particles of corrosion or particles of contaminants, how are those going to move under wave conditions? And then how obviously they get into sediment and the outcomes from that. And then finally, we want to assess the risks associated with release and dispersal of pipeline breakdown products and scales. So why is this research important? So in the North Sea, it contains somewhere about 4,000 kilometres of, it's not just subsea pipelines, but pipelines, umbilicals, and other subsea infrastructure of that type, which has been installed over decades with the oil and gas sector. Removal of pipelines is energy intensive. It's dangerous to some extent. So it's costly. It requires burning of high amounts of fuel, so large carbon footprint. So if we can leave it in place safely, then there are advantages. The North Sea does allow us, and along with Netherlands and Norway, to allow pipelines to be left in place if they don't pose a risk of navigation or environmental risks. So coming back to that environmental piece, we need to make sure that if we are going to leave something in place, is it environmentally safe? And one of the challenges around that is that even after cleaning, pipelines can contain residual scale and other contaminants which have accumulated. And I'll try and discuss them in a minute or two. So the whole project aims to provide some of the data that helps quantify degradation rates, break down particle dispersal, environmental risks, so authorities can make evidence-based decisions on whether to leave pipelines in place and whether that can be justified under UK regulatory criteria. So just going back to what the kind of things we're worried about. So pipeline scale is one of the things. So this is pipeline scales are typically accumulated from transported fluids. We get minerals precipitated from those transported fluids, and it gradually builds up, increases, reduces flow and increases pumping energy requirements. But these can also be left in the pipeline even after cleaning. So the question is, are these a challenge? Are these going to an environmental challenge? The alternative we can have in terms of contaminants are pipeline waxes. Again, these are buildups of accumulated paraffin and wax deposits along the surface. And again, they have similar challenges. For the operational perspective, they reduce operational efficiency, they increase energy consumption, they reduce flow. And hardened waxes can lead to blockages, both for production, but also hardened waxes may be quite hard to remove for a decommissioned pipeline. So what are we going to do about this? So we need to investigate how materials break down and dissolve over time to determine whether contaminants are released gradually or remain bound within the material. And we need to assess whether these migrate within sediment. So if they're on the seabed, do they migrate into the sediment? And what happens in terms of benthic mobility and pore water transport, and how we evaluate how far contaminants may penetrate surrounding sediments. I think that's one thing, but then need to know whether there's actually harm generated. So we need to test released materials and associated contaminants, whether these pose ecological risk. So the work that Chris is going to be doing, one of our researchers, is around this piece. So one of the first things is to kind of characterize the samples found, which then is the basis of the following work. We need to look at leach behaviours of scale, and time resolve that as well. So looking at short-term and longer-term setups to look at how these leach rates occur and quantify them. We need to look at benthic mobility assessment. So how the redox and microbial-driven processes are known to govern metal cycling sediments. So how these are going to move in the sediment. And then we're going to look at benthic bioaccumulation and ecotoxology. And the idea in that is to use a polychaete, a worm effectively, to quantify the ecotoxological effects. And we're going to do that based on an ASTM standard guideline. So that kind of covers what's inside the pipeline. But if we've got something which the pipeline is made of, we then need to look at how that's going to come apart as well. So the degradation of pipeline itself. So what are the corrosion processes and products? What are the medium and long-term rates of corrosion? How do the corrosion products evolve? And will these break down? So that picture on the left-hand side there is a typically decommissioned pipeline. And the kind of rust deposits you see are the kind of typical things we'd think about, but there are more types of deposit as well in terms of the corrosion. And again, it depends how long the system has been in place. So we've got short-term corrosion, which is primarily controlled by oxygen diffusion, so it's aerobic corrosion. We then have over sort of months to years, we've got diffusion controlled, moving from aerobic to anaerobic corrosion. And then longer term, we've got anaerobic or microbial induced corrosion. And you can see on the right-hand side here that the aerobic piece is a faster corrosion rate. Our move from aerobic to anaerobic is longer term and slower. And in the long term, we've got a very slow corrosion rate with that anaerobic stuff. We've got good experience looking at microbial induced corrosion. Michael Olatunde's PhD was on this. So we're building some of the basis on the work he's already done with his Chevron PhD project. And as I say, typically you'd think of corrosion as being rust, but we've got multiple different layers, and these may break up into different kind of particles. So we've got typically Fe3O4 and Fe ferric sulfide as well. We've got green rust. We've got all sorts of different materials in here, which will have different particle sizes and things like that. If we're looking at alloyed materials as well, we may also have other materials like manganese and others, which will also potentially come into the water column. So we really need to understand the evolution and characteristics of these layers over the medium and long term. So some of these pipelines will be out there for 40 years, some of the longer lived ones. Some of them will be much less than that, but typically some of the longest lived pipelines will be out for 40 years. So a large amount of corrosion, both potentially on the outside of the pipe, but also on the inside. And if we leave this in place, then we also need to know what's going to happen. But also, I mean, once we know what the corrosion particles look like in terms of what's going to happen in terms of corrosion, we also need to know how these are going to be generated particles. So typically that's going to happen from impact of sand particles or other particles. It could happen, I guess, a little bit from wave and tidal motion, but typically it's going to be a breakdown from things like sand particles. So we'll have oblique impact of sand particles, we'll have normal impact, and we'll be trying to simulate some of these conditions within some of the lab work we're going to be doing. So we've got the looking at the scales and sediment side of things, then we're going to be looking at the particles generated from this. So from the pipelines, we're going to end up with eroded corrosion products. These are going to be small particles, flakes, depending on the type of corrosion, but also on the erosion method. And the question we then got is, what are the effects of sea waves, current and sand concentration and size distribution on the breakdown of corrosion products, but then also on the transport of these. So our third kind of work package in this area is going to be looking at the pipeline breakdown products and how these are transported by waves and current. And this builds on some work we've done for the nuclear sector. Nuclear sector had some release particles on two sites onto the foreshore, and these particles move around under wave and current. So we've just recently finished some work, which Danny DeBar, who's going to work on this, his predecessor worked on. So we're building on some work that we've already done around this area. And what we're trying to do is understand the geospatial transport and how that's crucial for assessing environmental impact and risk. So there are particle models for predicting particle transport, and these depend on things like the current velocity or wave velocity, speed reduction factor, how much time the particle's moving, whether it's a free particle or whether it's buried, and we can then work out roughly how far particles are going to move. However, some of these need to be improved. So many models are unsuitable for modeling transport of pipeline breakdown products. So the idea is to improve some of these models. And the project I mentioned earlier, the one we've been looking at for the nuclear sector, TAPIS, and we started looking at particles under wave motion. And we've got a very nice piece of kit in the University of Aberdeen, which allows us to simulate seabed conditions under full velocity wave conditions. So we can run a simulation of particles on a seabed and how these will be dragged by the sea, either by marine or by tidal or by wave conditions. And this, hopefully this little video will work. This shows some photography from the seabed, taken with various irregular particle sizes. The work we've done for the nuclear sector, we had various particle sizes, particle densities, and looked at how those are moved under wave conditions. So that Danny's just literally started last week. So this is a very new part of the project. Just for those who don't know, so some of this work we've undertaken out at National Decommissioning Centre. We've popped up with a couple of other projects. And for those who don't know, we're part of Aberdeen University. We're up in Newborough. We're very much interdisciplinary. We're working right across the whole sector. Work very much with industry, academia, and regulated NGOs. We've got a large amount of testing equipment up here, and some of which we'll be utilising for some of these projects. Just to introduce you to the team. So Alfred Akasanya sends his apologies. He'd planned to be at this meeting and hasn't been able to. So Alfred's the project lead, supported by Malcolm Stone. Srinivas Shiramula and Alfred are kind of working with Michael Olatunde on the corrosion piece. Dominic's leading with Danny Dunbar. Sorry, we've got a fire alarm test. Is working with Danny Dunbar. We then have input from the School of Biological Science, so Chris Garrett, who I was talking about, who's been looking at the sediment piece and on the scale and things like that. So we've had some very good support. We've got about 4 different lots of scale, which Chris started working on. And he's supported by Rebecca von Helfeld and Professor Graham Payton as well. So that kind of ties up our project team. At that point, I will hand back over to the team.
Thanks, Richard. Really interesting presentation, and we've had a few questions in the chat. It's really exciting to see this project kicking off, and it is becoming an area of a lot of discussion. It's really fascinating to hear about the longevity of the pipelines, and that some might have been in there for 40 years. Wow. So thanks to our speakers. That concludes the talks for today. So we'll now move into the Q&A session. So please make sure your questions are in the Q&A tab if you haven't submitted them already. And if I could ask all of the speakers to please turn their cameras on if not done so already, so we can dive in and explore some of the questions and thoughts raised during the presentations. Thanks, everyone. So if I'd like to, so we'll start off. We've got a question for Nikki from Kenny Taylor. Kenny's asking Nikki, how does assessment of best practice for marine artificial structures, particularly those left in situ, consider the UK's developing circular economy strategies?
That's such a good question. And actually, we had a really interesting presentation on this recently. I can't remember the name of the person. Georgina, do you know who gave the presentation at the MMO?
Yes, it was Anne Vellenturf, I think, from Rescue at the University of Leeds.
Okay, so that's a really important name, Kenny, for you to make a note of, because she's been doing some fantastic work in this area. I think we were really surprised talking with her that actually we have aspirations towards the circular economy. It's really important, particularly when we're looking forward to the decommissioning of all the offshore wind structures which we're implementing now. We want to be really thinking ahead and thinking, how can we make sure that when we decommission those, we can reuse the parts and reuse what's there. The same with the oil and gas. It's a critical question, but our capacity for doing that at the moment is quite limited. But it's a really important part of the project, and I think it's useful you raising it, because we might bring it into some of our scenario development, how we can ensure that we bring that round more. But the person I would direct you to is as Georgina just mentioned.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nikki. Yeah, really good question. We've got another question from Andrew Edwards, and I think this one's for Sian and Daryl. Andrew's asking if you've got any sense of how the evidence packs from Objective 1 will look, what form this will take in terms of data, breadth of information and level of interpretation.
Big question. So what will they look like? The summary information pack will be the evidence that sits behind the public survey and the stakeholder surveys. We're currently drafting those at the moment, but what they essentially consist of is the policy and regulatory framework, and then a series of statements that come from either peer-reviewed literature or grey literature in terms of how the different types of decommissioning or different types of structures impact economy, environment and society. And so the summary information pack is going to be, I would say, sort of fairly high level, and then we need to make a version available for the public and the stakeholder workshops, which are more simplified version. But we just want to make sure that we have that backing piece that sits behind everything we do, so we can just go back to refer to it and, you know, make sure that we're not saying something about a decommissioning scenario that hasn't got anything that sits behind it at all. Andrew, you're PML, right? Is Andrew Edgar-Jones at PML? Yes, Nikki's nodding. So we're actually drafting the first version of that now, just around one scenario, so we can all get a sense of what that looks like, and be happy to run that by you as well, if you want to just kind of see what we think it looks like, and then you can feed in.
Brilliant, thank you, Sean. Okay, so we've got another question from Sander Sheffers for Richard. Sander's asking if you're making a comparative assessment, full removal versus leave in situ or partially, a clean objective comparison of what is the best environmental outcome. Is that something that's within the scope of work?
It's not within the scope work of corrodes. However, it is something that is the NDC we're looking at quite substantially. So we've actually published a paper looking at pipeline decommissioning and the comparative assessment piece, which has already been published. So in conjunction with Shell, we did a bit of work looking at one of Shell's Brent pipelines. But that won't be included within this. We're looking very much at the kind of science side of things rather than the decision-making process per se.
Okay.
But it is an area of interest, and I say we have published on it, and I can send a link to that if that's useful.
Yeah, that'd be useful. Thank you, Richard. So I'll head back over to Nikki. We've got quite a few questions in the chat. So we've got a question for Nikki from Bert Fockemer. Bert's asking, he's saying you're going to develop a decision support tool. Could you expand a little on how this is used in practice, whose decision and what type of decisions? Is it targeted at decisions by operators about their projects, or regulators about their evaluations, or scientists about their next research?
So they're focused to be used by industry and government. They're our primary users, but more generally as well. It's not one decision support tool, it's a suite. And so we'll have different support tools to speak to different people about different issues. We've got 4 decision support tools that we've developed previously already within the project, all with sort of slightly different angles which they take. They've all been co-developed, so they've all been developed with the users already in mind. We've learned our lesson by now as academics not to just go away, develop something and then hand it over at the end of the project. Don't worry, we've definitely moved on from that thinking. So we'll use the 4 that we've got already, and then what we're looking to do is speak at the moment to people about if they actually address the needs, and if they don't, then we'll look to develop something new. So the idea is to speak to all of those people that you mentioned, and to work with them to make sure that they're getting the information that they need. I think in a way, I think decision support tool is a funny term, isn't it? And I think sometimes it's a method of communicating evidence in a way that it can be more effectively used rather than actually making a decision. So that's kind of how we're thinking about them in this project.
Thanks for that, Nikki. Yeah, there's a lot of work going into the decision support tools. If I go back to Richard, we've got a question from Timothy Robbins. Timothy's saying that corrode looks like a fascinating research area. It currently appears to be a focus on the oil and gas sector. Is there an opportunity to expand the research to offshore wind turbines and export cabling, or do you know of any research that's going on in that area?
Okay, so I guess when the tender was pitched for this particular project, it was very much aimed at pipeline leaving in place. So we kind of focused around that. Having said that, the pieces of what we're doing around corrosion will be generic. So that would be equally applicable to anything that's in the seabed of similar type of steel. We will not have the capacity to look at export cabling or array cabling, primarily because we kind of steered away. We started originally looking at coatings and particularly plastics, things like that, and plastic coatings, because they're, if I remember rightly, one of the figures quoted by one of the previous INSITE projects was something like 200,000 tons of plastic in the North Sea in terms of coatings. But we were kind of pulled away from that because there's another project running looking at that area. So we wouldn't be looking at array and export cables because those are primarily plastic coatings. They should also be easier to remove, that they don't have the challenges around hydrocarbons, they don't have challenges around scale. But they also have high value materials, coppers and aluminium, which you probably want to recover anyway.
Thank you for that. So we'll move to Sean and Daryl. We've had a question from Paul, who's part of the INSITE team. Paul would be really interested in hearing how you plan to present or make the evidence accessible and understandable to participants who are probably not familiar with the context of decommissioning or understand much of the technical information relating to nature and energy that's available.
Daryl, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can do. Yeah, so good question. I think it's our biggest challenge, really. What we wanted to have was this kind of thorough evidence base that we can build our scenarios on. But within the team, we've got the expertise of knowing, of sort of developing public engagement type surveys, online surveys. So what we need to be able to do is simplify it enough to obviously keep the general members of the public engaged. But also make sure it's still based on that evidence. So it's quite a challenge. Another challenge, I guess, we have is this evidence pack itself. And obviously, when we come to the stakeholder side of things, then a lot of the stakeholders will know a lot of that evidence anyway. So how we try and juggle the before and after for the members of the public, I think it should be more straightforward. But for the engagement of the stakeholders themselves, we need to be careful how we manage the sort of dissemination of that material, the before and after surveys, because obviously that's what we're very much interested in, is seeing how perceptions and attitudes change both before and after kind of exposure to the evidence, if you like.
I just add as well. Yeah, I just add as well, it's just always good practice, and we have quite a few rounds of pilots and reviews as well. So you can always tell when a question just lands badly or it just doesn't work. And so it's that process of making sure that the final one that goes out is something that has actually had a lot of behind the scenes testing and scrutiny before we release it into the wild.
Yes, definitely. I think if I just latch on to the back of that question, Michael Cobb has asked the README team, are stakeholders going to be identified in the UK only, or is it a wider selection of countries to get a wider North Sea perspective of the research?
It's a good question, and it is just the UK, because in order to do a piece of social science around the broader North Sea, we'd have to also develop the questionnaire and test it across multiple countries as well, and have a much bigger marketing budget to do it in those other countries as well. So I think that would be a next step, if there ever was one within INSITE, is to develop that North Sea perspective. And it's why we've developed the process to be repeatable, so it can then potentially be rolled out to other areas of the North Sea. But I think there's quite a lot of different context, and especially in how we ask questions as well across the European audience.
Yeah, certainly. I can imagine some of the language and legislation barriers that play into that as well, or challenges rather. Thanks for that, Sean. If I then move across to Nikki, we've got a blend of two questions. So Timothy Robbins is asking, looking at the stakeholders involved in Valmass, they couldn't see the Crown Estate and would be interested to know if Renewables UK have been approached to be involved in the community of practice. And I'm just going to blend that with Paul's question, who's mentioned that you said that there was you mentioned a lack of connectivity between key stakeholders, and Paul's asking what you think the main challenges and opportunities are associated with developing the communication pathways and networks for that engagement.
So yes to Crown Estate, great big yes. It wasn't on our original slide because we weren't allowed to include it when we were applying for the funding. So, but yeah, they're very much embedded. all of our data will be going through their marine data exchange, and attending all our meetings. So, and Renewable UK likewise also, yes, one of our critical friends. So, but thank you for raising those two. I mean, I think it's so difficult. I think one of the biggest challenges is right at the top with DEFRA and DESNZ. So we have a situation where the two main government groups don't always get together and meet. So that's a key challenge, is at the very highest level, is enhancing communication there. What we're hoping to do with our community of practice is create a space where everybody can sort of share information and learn from each other and get a better idea of what's going on. Obviously, a challenge is bringing together the fishing industry with the offshore energy industry, which is something we're looking at in quite a lot of depth as well. There is some really positive communication there, but there's work that needs to be done. What we're hoping to do is approach this using sorry, I have a very annoying cat. Is to approach this again a bit like the decision support tools. I think different things work for different people. For some people, a webinar like today is a really good way of understanding and learning what's going on. Another thing is to have workshops. What we will be doing quite a lot of is having workshops where we bring people from these different sectors together in the same space to work on things like the visioning that I spoke about in the presentation. So what's their vision for the North Sea? And the idea of this is to try and understand the common ground between those different people, but also the shared experiences and aspirations of those common people. So for some people, it'll be bringing this to workshops. Some people, it'll be the community of practice. Some people, it will be online workshops. So lots of different methods to integrate these people. We're a big 4-year project, so we've got chance to learn as well. So as we go along, we'll be trying out different methods to bring people together and learning from what does and doesn't work. But it's very individual, isn't it? I think the methods that allow us to be brought together. So we'll be using a whole suite of different approaches to that. But great question, both of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. And so over to Richard. Matt is asking so Matt says they're involved in the quantification of contaminants, and it'd be great to hear your opinion on which contaminants you think present the greatest risk to the North Sea ecosystems. Would it be iron from the bulk steel breakdown, or perhaps a toxic trace contaminant such as mercury?
Okay, I think I've probably put something back into chat, which came from Chris on this. But I mean, the contaminants, I mean, the iron is not a major worry, but it will be the other contaminants. So in the southern North Sea, mercury is a slight problem. It's obviously much worse in other places like the Gulf of Thailand. So the iron piece is not a major problem. It's going to be less a problem. Having said that, I mentioned earlier, alloying elements might be, because we've got things like manganese and various other things in there as well, which may have some toxicological ecotoxicological challenges. So the steel, isn't it? It's going to be the contaminants, whether those are hydrocarbon contaminants from waxes and things like that, or the likes of some of the heavy metals which have been brought up.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And then we've had another question for Sean and Daryl. This one's from Leandro, who's asking, will there be any work related to or that will address the issue of social value or social return on investment in decommissioning, considering the most commonly evaluated alternatives such as total removal, leave in place, and intermediate alternatives?
We're not going to be looking into social return on investment at all. We have discussed whether we start to bring in any evidence around circular economy at all, in terms of what the public perception is, but we also recognise that can be quite a tricky thing to tackle with the public in terms of their general perceptions around recycling, but it is something that we are considering. But if the person that asked the question has any key reports or documents that they want to share that they think is worth us having sight of, because it sounds like a really interesting question, and I'm not quite sure where you're getting at, but maybe if you can share any of your experience with us, then we can have a look at it and see how it might be integrated. But Daryl, do you have anything to add?
No, I think very much the focus of our work is getting this baseline data, and then the kind of the change in attitudes is the kind of main focus of our work. Given the time frame we're working to, it's a very quick turnaround for the project, and therefore obviously that's limited what the sort of scope we can go to. I think we were all very keen to take the project in other directions as well, but we have to be realistic of what we can deliver within 18 months. So yeah, really interesting point. But yeah, ourselves aren't going to, I'm not sure whether Nikki and Valmas, whether they're looking at social values in any way.
I was going to say the same. Yes, we are, but I think I would be really interested, like Sian said, to learn a little bit more about the person asking the question. So if they could give us a bit more information, I think I'd be very happy to share that back to the lead of our work package 5.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks all. We can definitely get in touch and link you up with the project teams if people are willing to expand on those conversations. Just let us know. We had another question that's had a few upvotes for Richard from Anthony Firth. Anthony's asking, are there connections being made between corrode and research into comparable questions relating to potentially polluting wrecks, which have typically been in the sea over longer periods?
Oh, that's a good one. We hadn't kind of built that into the programme. It's a good question to raise because there will be vessels which have sunk with oil contamination, various other things. So I think there is potential for doing something. It's not built in. We've got quite a tight time scale and quite a limited budget for doing the various corrosion studies and the various ecotoxicological studies and other studies. So it is worth us having a look, but it's not going to be a thing we can do address majorly within the confines. And again, I'll come back to the fact that when we were bidding for this, it was very much around pipelines was the key area. But I can see why that question comes up, because there will be distinct synergies between the two sets of artificial structures.
Yeah, certainly. There's some really good sort of food for thought questions coming in here. I think there's a lot of interest in generating new project ideas and additions, which is great. Henk has just asked a question for the whole INSITE team, and he's asking, what are the best ways to stay in touch and hear about the latest research updates as they emerge?
Shall I go first? Is that okay? So we have our community of practice. So if you send your details, if you want to join our community of practice, please send your details in. This will be kicking off in earnest in the next sort of month or so. What this will do is it will provide you with regular updates about what's happening in Valmas, but we're hoping also to support the communication from Corrode and README and in sort of across the INSITE 3 programme. So we've got a database of names. So if you don't mind sending that would be great. We'll get you involved that way. There's also our Critical Friends group, which is a smaller, tighter group. So if you want a little bit more involvement and you want to be coming along to our workshops, then you can let us know about that as well. And then there's through the community practice, we'll be sending out regular newsletters, so you'll be getting updated on a regular basis that way. And there's also the website as well. So lots of different routes there.
Shall I go? I think from our perspective, we're quite short delivery, so we don't have a place where we're going to gather the information or to send it out, but we will be relying heavily on HMC and the INSITE team. So as we are generating our outputs, stakeholder briefings, policy briefs, deliverables, then we hope to be able to communicate that to the broad audience through the HMC and INSITE website. But if anybody does want to reach out, we're obviously all interlinked as projects, and Nikki's Valmas project with its community of practice, then hopefully there'll be that close intersection there between researchers who are interested. But if not, then if there's no other option, then just email me directly and I will see what I can do.
I think that from Corrode's perspective, we're probably kind of similar. It's quite a fast turnaround for these things. I think we're planning still to present something at the SIGN conference in June. So if you're there, hopefully we'll be able to give you some sort of update, because obviously we're bit like Sian, we're only a couple of months into things at the moment. We're kind of building up our literature study, and Chris has done some of the initial sediment studies, things like that. But yeah, the key thing will probably be sign in June, and then we'll try to update other people. But if you're really keen, please get in contact with Alfred or one of the other team, and we'll update you.
Yeah, thanks all. There is a lot going on and a lot of engagement activities planned over the next few years. So there'll be lots of outreach and ways to get in contact. Thank you all. We do have a couple more questions in the Q&A, but I think we'll leave it there for today, and we can pass those on to the relevant project teams to get back via email correspondence or further. I'd just like to share a few closing remarks. So thank you all for attending the webinar. As mentioned throughout this webinar, our next INSITE event will be the Structures in the Marine Environment Conference, SIME, and that'll happen later this year on the 9th and 10th of June at the Copthorne Hotel in Newcastle. The registration, abstract and poster submission pages are now open, and Paul's going to add the link in the chat, so please save the date, and we really hope to see you all there. It will be an in-person event only this year. That's all from me now, and I hope you've all found this really interesting. Please let us know of any feedback through the webinar survey form. I think the link will also be added to the chat, and there's a QR code here for scanning. It's been really great to share this with you, and if you'd like to get in touch, please reach out through the email, through our mailing list, the LinkedIn site. Reach out to the various project teams, and thank you all again, and we wish you the best of the week.